I'd like to welcome to the show Jennifer Huddleston, Senior Fellow in Technology Policy at the Cato Institute here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Free the Economy, Jen.
Thanks for having me today.
So, we're going to talk about privacy and big tech and all sorts of online stuff. But to give our listeners, if they are not already familiar with your work, which of course they should be, uh, just give us like a real quick background on your career and what brought you here. How'd you end up working on these issues?
So, broadly speaking, my portfolio covers the intersection of law and technology. That includes a wide range of topics, including data privacy, that I know we're going to talk about today, as well as things like antitrust, the regulatory state and technology, free speech online, and of course, like many of us, a growing interest in AI. Prior to working in policy, I went to law school at the University of Alabama. And I
Okay,
was
yeah.
also a teacher in the Mississippi Delta where I taught upper elementary school and middle school math.
All right, fantastic. So, one of the big issues we hear people talking about big tech and sort of corporate America in general is, of course, consumer privacy. So and online privacy. And I wonder, since you've obviously spent a lot of time thinking about this, what does that actually mean to the average consumer? Because I feel like that could cover a lot of stuff. People are definitely worried about, uh, and I definitely remember this from the early days of online shopping and e-commerce. People were like, "Well, I'm not going to put my credit card information to some random website. What if it gets hacked and someone steals my credit card?" Um, do most Americans today, are they concerned mostly about stuff like that, like financial stuff, or are they really worried about the sort of anonymized data tracking where some computer somewhere knows you were on a certain website, but no one's actually like using that information to cause you any harm?
I think that's a really good question because we hear time and again that when you see polling, the tech policy issue that Americans care the most about is data privacy. However, what any individual American means when they say they care about data privacy can vary tremendously. So for some people, it is concerns about those cookie trackers, or they find it creepy that, a social media platform guessed that they were interested in something or whatever. For other people, it's much more about data security. Is there the correct kind of encryption involved in sending secure information, whether it's bank information or medical records? For others, it's concerns about government surveillance or the potential ability of the government to get this data. So when we say the words data privacy more casually, we mean a wide variety of things. Oftentimes, when we see this in the policy space, the term you'll hear used is consumer privacy or consumer data privacy, which is really talking more about some of those questions of what, if any, is there a need when it comes to regulation or policy surrounding the interactions that a consumer and an online platform, whether it's a shopping platform or a florist or even your local grocery store, can have between the data that they give that platform and the ways that that platform can use that data.
All right, that's interesting. And you know, I, we've definitely talked before. Let's show here about the difference between what a big company is going to do with your data versus what a big government, such as the U.S. federal government, is going to do with your data. And I've seen some polling. I think Pew did a poll last year about privacy, and they specifically asked. They made a big point about asking different questions about corporate behavior versus government behavior, and there were sort of different levels of concern about that, as well as people telling the pollsters, a super majority telling them, I don't really know what anyone's doing with my data. And they're like a little concerned about that. Uh, because we had Deb Collier from Citizens Government Waste. She was here in episode 61. And she also has like a background doing IT stuff on Capitol Hill. So she's got a good, view across this stuff. But uh, I guess at the end of the day, the government can both demand your data in a way that a private company can't. Like you can just not do business with some other .com that you don't want to deal with, but you kind of don't have that choice with the government. Uh, and then all the data the government has, sometimes of literally every person in the country, is all sometimes in a single database, and government databases aren't magically less hackable than private databases. So I guess the real question is, should we be more concerned than we seem to be in general in America with government data security as opposed to Amazon Web Services?
There are a couple of different questions there. One of the things you point out is that oftentimes the concern is not necessarily that consumers even want to make a different choice. It's sometimes that they just feel disempowered, that they don't know what's being done. They want to be able to know that it aligns with their preferences. So when it comes to the kind of consumer side of these things, you know, your large tech companies or a new social media platform or even a shopping website you may be using, we've seen a lot of platforms really take different steps to help consumers feel more empowered. Whether it's something like the app transparency elements that you see on Apple iPhones of when you download a new app and it'll ask if you want the app to track you, it will ask if you want it to have your location information, and if so, do you want it all the time, just when you're using the app? Really providing consumers with some more tools to kind of decide there. And sometimes consumers may think that they don't want something, like they may think they don't want the Starbucks app to have their location, because why would I want the Starbucks app to have my location, until the first time that they walk into Starbucks and their drink's not ready because they didn't know you were on your way or whatever. And so sometimes it's consumers figuring out why and how the data is being used. We've also seen a lot of the large online platforms like Google and Facebook roll out forms of privacy checkups where it'll nudge consumers every so often or at their request to go to this kind of um, area that just runs through all your privacy settings with you, because maybe you chose something when you set up the account a decade ago that now no longer reflects the actual preferences that you have. But you also bring up this good question about government data and whether we should be concerned about, government data being out there and particularly the hackability of it. I think this goes back to the distinctions at time between data privacy and data security and surveillance concerns. So, are there ways that we need to ensure improved data security from the government? Are there times when we need to clarify from a civil liberties perspective what that data can be used for? We've seen conversations like this around census data, really trying to ensure that individuals know when they respond to the census that this information is only being used for census purposes, that it's not being handed over elsewhere. And also at times, really increasing things like warrant requirements for law enforcement access to data. We've seen this happen in several states, notably Utah, where they've um, said that rather than just being able to request data from companies, they have to actually go through a more formal process like they would for traditional offline data. That's not to say law enforcement can't have that data if it's needed as part of an investigation, but just that the mere fact that it was online instead of written in a notebook doesn't change kind of how we would expect people to address it.
That's great. And I'm thinking about, so on the problem side is the question of what are private companies doing with your data versus what is the government doing with your data? And then on the sort of solution side, there's the what do we expect government to help us with versus what do we expect private like products and services to help us with. And and so that I think is interesting because of course there's already huge multi-billion dollar business in consumer privacy, consumer online privacy tools, right? There's all sorts of stuff you can buy. There's like basic stuff like antivirus, which part of the reason why people buy that sort of antivirus computer safety software is privacy, but also VPNs and all sorts of other stuff, right? Anyone who's some people may be watching this the video version of this podcast on YouTube, and anyone who is watches a lot of YouTube knows that some of those YouTube videos are sponsored by Shark VPN or Nordtruck or Nordform. The that's a popular uh, online privacy tool. So, uh, is this a sign that things are working? Right? Is this so? When people talk about like, well, we need government intervention because there's a market failure. Is this a market success?
One of the things we've seen is that there are a wide range of privacy preferences. And as you point out, some of that response is seen in the market tools that respond to the more privacy sensitive consumer. So there are some people where privacy is a really important thing for them online. either because of reasons like maybe they're a political dissident in their country and it's really important to them that they're not at risk. And so things like VPN and encrypted messaging are going to be really, really important. For other people, they'd rather make other trade-offs. Maybe they'd rather have a 20% off coupon in exchange for their email address. With a local boutique. That's also choosing to reveal certain information about yourself. And most of us make those trade-offs every day at different points and with different companies, depending on our level of trust for that particular company and at that particular time. What we do see in the market is that there are a wide range of revealed preferences as well as stated preferences. So, as we were discussing earlier, there are very few people who, if you ask, do you care about your data privacy, would say no. Most of
Right.
us do care about our privacy to some degree. But then when you start asking people different questions about what they do on a daily basis or what they would be willing to pay for a more private solution for, you're going to get a wide range of answers. And it's not just things that we think about, like using a VPN versus logging on to the public Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. It's also things like, what are you choosing to do when you're in a public space? Are you working on really sensitive material, or are you using a privacy screen? Or are you choosing what are you choosing to put out there in the first place? Is your Instagram account set to public or private? We can all think of different people in our lives who have very different preferences around these things. And so when we're really talking about this from a policy point of view, the question is, are there any areas where there's such clear catastrophic potential harm, where there's such a clear market failure, where kind of the risk is so societally agreed upon that we can't just allow individuals to have different preferences? We have to kind of choose to at least potentially eliminate some of those choices. And so in the US, we've tended to have a very sectoral case by case approach to data privacy of when we identify a type of privacy issue that we think is such a high risk, we may see some degree of regulation only on that particular issue. So, for example, we have the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, that deals with young people under 13 who might not be able to make those decisions. And you want to ensure that parents are giving appropriate consent. We also have specific privacy laws around things like medical records and financial records that come into play with a lot of that information that the average individual is concerned about and does consider particularly more sensitive.
Yeah, so when it comes to medical privacy, I think we all got a crash course in that when people started talking about HIPAA during the COVID-19 epidemic, including a lot of people who maybe weren't entirely clear on what it was. Um, so when you bring up kids and child welfare, and that I think is certainly one of the most sympathetic cases, for new government regulation potentially is to protect kids rather than adults, right? When an adult is, setting up social media accounts online and interacting online, uh, the default, I think, a lot of Americans is that they should have maximum freedom. But uh, when kids are online, well, maybe they need some more protection. And so this Senate, I believe Senate just voted overwhelmingly for a bill called the Kids Online Safety Act. It's often spelled out as KOSA, and not taken up in the House yet. But there's a lot of debate, in the past few months about that, about whether the government should be more aggressive in doing stuff to protect kids online. What do you think? And you said that, and as you mentioned, there's already the COPPA, the Children's Online Protection Act. So there's already some precedent for Congress passing rules about this. What do you think about this latest iteration, the Kids Online Safety Act?
So as I mentioned, we do have COPPA, which is aimed at under 13. So I think one thing that's really important to think about is I think when we talk about kids, a lot of times people are imagining very young children, and that we're largely talking about teenagers in a lot of these cases. But we're also talking about adults because one of the things when it comes to the internet and a lot of these youth online safety bills is the presumption is that everyone has to be treated like they're under 18 or under the age that the bill applies to until proven that they're over. That means this is going to require additional information, not only from young users potentially, but from adult users as well. And when we're talking about a lot of these things like youth online safety, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm a former upper elementary school and middle school teacher. I taught sixth grade. I certainly care a great deal about young people and have seen both the benefits that technology can have for them, as well as people who have had negative experiences with technology, whether they were adults or teenagers themselves. Um, when but we really start to see that privacy, even if we agree that it's a good thing, even if we agree that it's a right, doesn't exist in a vacuum. And oftentimes can come up against other things that we agree are a good thing and agree are rights, like free expression. So what happens when you have something like age verification or some sort that we see in a lot of youth online safety laws that can require additional information and really potentially undo anonymous speech. Again, we can think of a lot of valid reasons why an individual may need to speak anonymously for their own safety, for voicing political dissent in certain climates, all sorts of reasons that we may need anonymous or pseudonymous speech that are very beneficial. It also can come into play when it comes to things like a right to deletion. Even if it's a young person asking to invoke this right, what does that mean about other people's content? If, you're a 16-year-old and your 18-year-old friend tags you in the photo and then you invoke the right to delete it, have you have you impacted their speech rights as well? How do we balance those kind of issues?
Yeah, and I think that, you mentioned a really good point about here, which is kind of like is the flip side of how we usually think about privacy when it comes to freedom of speech. And a lot of the debates we've had going back several years about social media moderation, and things like shadow banning, and uh, how Twitter, now X or Facebook, is like what posts it allows and what it doesn't. Uh, in this case, you want people to know about what you're doing online, right? That's what social media is, right? You want as many followers as possible. You want as many people to look at what you're doing. But even in there, like you said, there's still a case for online privacy protection, because if you're tweeting at uh, you know, crazy politics cat 47, and you work at a place or you live in a place where your political opinions would not be very popular, you don't want someone to find out that you're, crazy politics cat 47. You want to stay pseudonymous in that case. You got the persistent pseudonym. And so I guess, the question is, when is privacy not just about privacy? When is privacy about sort of managing your kind of personhood online writ large? It's not always just not wanting for people to find out about things. Sometimes it's about managing wanting people to find out some things, but not others.
And I think that goes back to we all make a lot of different choices in our online lives when it comes to privacy on a regular basis that we might not even think of as privacy choices. That when we're choosing what accounts we make public versus what accounts we make private, when we're choosing, who we share different bits of information about, whether we use something that's more identifiable or something that's more of an anonymous username. These are all things that kind of factor into what's really a complicated decision that we might not even think of as a privacy decision. And so we're really making those individual calculations and trade-offs on any given day right now. So I think one of the other interesting things, though, that is starting to emerge are the conversations around AI and data privacy and how that's going to evolve in this space. We've seen a lot of this in the kind of social media debate and the different choices we can make there. But I think some people are asking questions of, does AI change any of this? And if so, how does that impact how we think about privacy?
And the the AI angle here is interesting because it involves potentially exposing, certainly in the context of like image generation, there's concerns that there could be images of you, of an individual user, in non-complimentary or insulting ways that gets treated as information about you, but isn't even real information, right? So if if I used like an AI generation tool and I, pasted your face into a picture of you like beating someone up, and I was like, look at Jen, look at the way she beats people up, isn't it terrible? That's not a real photo, so it's not real information about you that's being shared, but it's a disparaging characterization, and so, and it's very easy to create these days, so people are concerned about that. But one thing I've noticed as someone who has dabbled in using a lot of image generation tools in the past year or two is that you already have uh, competition and standards between the different tools. Um, Midjourney and Copilot from Bing have different policies than Grok, for example. And there's been a lot of talk about that just in the past few days. That uh, there is a competition between companies who say, "Well, don't worry, our AI image generation is safe because we won't let people create visualizations that are violent or sexual or insulting or that depict real people. Right? We're specifically saying we're not going to do that. And then you have other tools that are like, oh no, come in, the water's fine, free for all. Make any image you want. And so on one level, that's just a sort of competitive thing, right? The people who don't want crazy gory images will probably navigate to the former, and people who want to experiment will navigate to the latter. But there's also obviously political implications uh, because Midjourney wouldn't let you before the candidates changed, wouldn't let you create any image visualization with either Trump or Biden in it,
So I
and now without Harris and JD Vance as VP. Those are you it won't process a prompt with those names in it. What does that mean?
So I think there are a couple of different things to be aware of. One is, when we're talking about the type of issue you brought up of what do we do if an image is generated of, whether it's President Trump or Taylor Swift or you or I, there are existing defamation laws out there. So in many cases, things, just a new technology does not change the existing law if there are harms out there, if there's a loophole around the fact that it was AI generated rather than a real image. Those are the type of things that courts are likely to be able to handle or that could be clarified in the law. There is a far more interesting question, though, about data privacy laws or data privacy policy and AI that probably doesn't get as much attention as kind of the story that you told. And that is what happens when some of the data privacy laws that were built for the internet era come into contact with AI. And we've seen this happening in Europe, where AI products haven't initially been allowed to be launched, not because they're doing something horrible that could allow some kind of gory images or the other things that you kind of mentioned, but merely because they can't, for example, comply with the deletion requirements. Because what does it mean to delete the data once an AI has already been trained on it? What do you have to do to a model there? It also raises some interesting questions about things that have kind of been presumed to be best practices and have those changed in any way. So oftentimes we hear people really promoting the idea of data minimization, that a company should only retain the minimal amount of data on its users that it knows it's going to need for a purpose. Well, when it comes to AI, sometimes we don't know what that data is actually going to be, particularly when we're not talking about things like ChatGPT. We're talking about some of the incredible, literally life-saving technologies that are coming about and being able to, say, diagnose different types of cancers or take into account these different factors that maybe if you minimize the data to only have what you knew were going to be the variables at the time, you may miss certain things. Or for those that are concerned about potential bias in AI, one way to overcome bias a lot of times is to actually have more data used, more factors used in AI, not fewer. And so it really kind of raises this question of, as we see some of these data privacy regulatory frameworks come online in the states, as we continue to see federal data privacy discussions here in the US, knowing what's happened in GDPR, are there any ways that these frameworks are going to potentially negatively impact this really beneficial technology development?
Well, that's a really good point. And because sometimes it is the data you provide to a company is the important stuff. Your name, your email address, maybe your physical mailing address, that sort of thing. So we think of that as like the data that is the stuff we're focused on. But in some cases, it's how you interact with the service produces data points that are then valuable. So the most obvious way is sort of like if you click on things and you like things, then an algorithm on, say, a social media platform, for example, can feed you more of that information that it knows you like, right? And so that's not, me liking a tweet or giving a positive review to a product on Amazon, or modifying a AI search query, uh, is valuable information, and you could consider that data, but it's usually not. Those usually aren't the stuff that we think about when we think about data privacy. And again, if you take this data minimization idea to an extreme, you would say, oh, well, don't don't collect anything that's not absolutely necessary. Well, all of those data points that are interactions, me liking things, me rating things, me interacting with a platform, are are the only way that they have of making the platform better and making it better for me, right?
And I think we often forget what the internet was like and what, even watching TV was like before the day and age of personalization. Now most of us expect our experiences online and to some degree offline to be personalized to the information that we've given a company, and that those are the choices that we've made. Many of us find that more enjoyable than, getting the random TV ads you used to get back in the day. And so we have to consider, what is the other option like, and is that something that we actually prefer? And that other option is still there. You can still turn off the tracking. You can still turn off the personal preferences. You can still turn off the personalization. It's just that most of us prefer that other experience.
Wow, imagine YouTube and Netflix with no personalized recommendations. A wild and crazy place it would be. Um, so we've talked a lot about angles here and about some of the things government has already done, is considering doing. And as policy analysts, really our job is to boss Congress around and tell the government what to do. They usually don't listen to us, but that's we're kind of paid to do that anyway. So when it comes to these issues of especially like consumer online privacy, consumer electronic privacy, what should policymakers be doing?
I think one of the greatest concerns right now is what's emerging with the state patchwork. Last time I checked, we're up to either 18 or 19 states with their own data privacy laws. And the problem is that creates confusion both for the consumer as well as particularly for small businesses. And it's important to note that when we're talking about small businesses and data privacy, we're not just talking about small online platforms. Oftentimes, we're also talking about your local florist or your local regional grocery chain that may find itself subject to some of these data privacy laws because they have a loyalty program or because of the type of information that they collect on consumers to provide the best products. Um, as I mentioned, with this growing state patchwork, even when these laws look similar, there's a lot of room for interpretation around different things, a lot of additional rulemakings. And so you risk either having the most restrictive states, in this case, probably California, be the de facto federal policy, and all the companies kind of rush to comply with that. Or you have something where some products are available to you in one state and other products are not because of the different privacy laws, and consumers never really know what their rights are, or and companies never really know what's going to be allowed from state to state. So I think the need for a federal preemption in this area is certainly something that needs to be considered, particularly given that data, as you mentioned, is often not just one piece of information in the sense of, putting in your address. It's often the interactions. And if I'm sitting in Virginia and you're sitting in Maryland, then those are going to have two different states involved potentially. And so that really is why this has to be handled at a federal level.
All right. That's a great summary, Jen. Uh, Thank you so much for your insights here. And before we go, where should people find you and all your fabulous work online?
So you can find links to much of my writing on Cato's website, cato.org. And then you may also follow me on X or Twitter at JR Huddles.
All right, definitely run out right now and follow Jen. Thanks again for being with us, Jen.
Thanks.